Have you ever looked into her eyes while she's crying and felt like you were the one who did something wrong, even when you didn't? Not because she blamed you, because her sadness felt like a judgment on your worth. So you softened. You apologized for things you didn't do. You explained yourself when no one asked. You shrank your voice, not out of guilt, but out of fear that if you held your ground, she would leave. She didn't demand obedience. You offered it. And with each small concession made in the name of keeping the peace, something in you began to dissolve. Not visibly, not instantly, but quietly, until one day you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man who used to have a spine. That's how it happens. Not through betrayal, through gradual inversion. Her emotions became your instruction manual, her silence your signal to act. You weren't leading anymore, you were adapting, and for a while, you called it care, maturity, even love. But it wasn't love, it was erosion, because the moment your truth becomes negotiable, just to keep her comfortable, you are no longer loving her, you are managing her. And most men never name this fracture, they just keep bending. Not because she asked, because somewhere deep down they believed that being chosen required them to disappear. But what if none of that is love? What if it's a test? Schopenhauer once wrote that women were incapable of reason. Most dismiss it as bitterness, some quote it with pride, but few ask what kind of man writes that. Not a villain, a man who wasn't chosen. He didn't come to that conclusion through detached observation. He came to it through disappointment, coded into theory. She didn't respond to his intellect, and rather than face the grief of being unseen, he reframed her as incapable of seeing. This is the pattern, not just his, yours. Most men inherit a quieter version of the same story, that women are different, that they're emotionally pure, that they feel more, lie less, love better. You're taught that if you're honest, present, and patient, she will choose you, stay with you, soften for you. But this myth isn't education, it's anesthesia. It numbs you to the truth that she is not governed by narrative, but by instinct. Schopenhauer was right about one thing. Her choices are not rational in the way a man defines reason, but he was wrong about why. He thought it was a flaw. He couldn't admit it was selection, a function of survival. She doesn't choose based on moral weight. She chooses based on gravitational pull. And when your devotion doesn't create that pull, when your emotional openness doesn't anchor her instinct, something in you breaks. And if you refuse to feel that break, you will do what he did. You will turn confusion into certainty. You will call her blind, broken, manipulative, not because she is, but because you no longer trust your own ability to hold her attention without dissolving yourself. That is the true myth of her innocence. Not that she's pure, but that she's incapable of being cold. She can be, she will be, not out of cruelty, but because instinct has no use for your sentimentality. She is not who you dreamed, but she is real. And until you see her clearly, you will keep offering your truth to a version of her that doesn't exist. She doesn't know she's testing you. That's what makes it real. When she pulls away at the moment you get closer, when her warmth fades the more open you become, when her silence lasts just long enough to make you question yourself, you look for strategy, but there isn't one. What you're witnessing is instinct, not intention. The test is not spoken, it's embedded. She is not deciding what kind of man you are. She is feeling it beneath your words, beneath your promises, beneath your gestures of affection. And what she's feeling for has nothing to do with goodness. She's scanning for gravity, not the kind that attracts, the kind that holds, the kind that does not shift with her moods, does not explain itself into oblivion, and does not apologize for existing. She doesn't need your love, she needs to feel your axis. This is where most men collapse, because they confuse her softness for safety and her emotions for moral truths. And so they begin adjusting, bending, performing stability instead of embodying it. But instinct knows the difference. It always does. You think she left because you weren't enough. But the truth is harder. She left because you weren't unmoved. She didn't test you to hurt you. She tested you to feel you. And what she felt was negotiation, not presence. Schopenhauer never made this distinction. He saw instinct as manipulation, because he never stopped expecting validation from it. He wanted her to choose his depth, his mind, his fidelity to principle, but none of those things made her body feel protected. So when she didn't choose him, he called her defective. But instinct isn't defective, it's indifferent. That's what cuts deepest. Not that she lied, but that she didn't need to. She smiled when she was done. She cried when she was deciding. She held your hand when she had already let go. And none of it was conscious. That's what makes it difficult to grieve. You're not letting go of a betrayal. You're letting go of an illusion. That emotion equals intention. It doesn't. Emotion is instinct in costume. And if you can't see that, you will keep mistaking her signals for certainty. And you'll keep failing tests you were never taught to notice. You told yourself you were creating safety, but what you were really creating was stillness. A stillness built on silence, not structure. You didn't lead with presence, you negotiated with softness. You tiptoed around her reactions, anticipated her moods, swallowed your opinions. And it looked like love. It looked like patience. But it wasn't connection, it was avoidance. Because emotional safety is not built through obedience. It's built through orientation. And without realizing it, you made her emotions the axis of your behavior. Not because you lacked strength, but because you mistook harmony for intimacy. And so you shrunk. Not visibly, subtly. You began saying what would keep the peace. You edited your sharpness to avoid discomfort. You became a mirror of what you thought she wanted. But a man without tension isn't safe. He's invisible. She didn't feel anchored by your agreement. She felt unchallenged by your absence. And slowly, her instinct withdrew. Not because she didn't feel cared for, but because she could no longer feel you. You told yourself she needed emotional softness, but what she needed was your edge to remain intact. This is the lie of safety, that if you remove all conflict, all friction, all masculine tension, she will feel protected. But she doesn't feel protected by your passivity. She feels protected by your immovability. Schopenhauer never made this distinction. He believed women were irrational for not choosing his depth. But it wasn't his mind that failed. It was his stillness, his reluctance to confront, to sharpen, to hold. Safety doesn't come from emotional fluency. It comes from the man who remains himself under pressure. And you can't fake that. You can't perform it. You either embody it or instinct detects the absence. Because the moment you begin shaping yourself to preserve connection, you lose the very force that made it possible in the first place. And she will feel that loss, even if she can't name it. You didn't lose her because you lacked depth. You lost her because you stopped creating gravity. She felt you in the beginning, not because you had all the answers, but because you had a direction. Something in you moved, even if it was incomplete. And instinct follows movement, not empathy, not goodness, but orientation. But then something shifted, not in her, in you. You started tracking her moods, measuring your language, performing steadiness. You thought it was growth, thoughtfulness, maturity, but it wasn't embodiment. It was adaptation. And adaptation, when done to preserve approval, isn't intimacy, it's inversion. Every time you adjusted instead of acted, softened instead of stood, explained instead of decided, you chipped away at your center. You were no longer grounded, you were managing. And without mass, there is no gravity. She no longer circled you because you no longer had a center. You were in orbit around her silence, her tone, her approval. And here's what instinct does when it no longer feels weight. It looks for contrast, not out of malice, out of necessity. This is where Schopenhauer found himself. He offered depth, philosophy, brilliance, but none of it landed. And rather than admit that instinct wasn't responding to his essence, he built a worldview around her failure to recognize it. He couldn't accept that coherence is not the currency of feminine attraction. So he reframed her instinct as irrational, defective, unworthy. But instinct isn't defective. It's indifferent to anything offered without embodied weight. She doesn't drift because she fails to understand you. She drifts when she no longer feels you. And if you can't hold that without blame, you'll turn her into a symbol, either the angel who didn't see you or the manipulator who used you. But she was neither. She was instinct, responding to the unspoken shift in your signal, not a betrayal, a recalibration. And if you make her nature wrong, you'll never reclaim your structure. You'll waste your strength dissecting her behavior instead of rebuilding your axis. Schopenhauer made that mistake. He intellectualized what he should have integrated. He wanted her to affirm his value, not test it. And when she didn't, he turned grief into doctrine. But she was never the author of his collapse. She was the mirror. And if you're collapsing, stop diagnosing her silence. Ask why you abandoned your center in the first place. Because the question isn't, why didn't she choose me? It's, what did I stop embodying when her response became my compass? Until you answer that, you'll keep repeating the same cycle. Treating her instinct as punishment instead of signal. Blaming the mirror instead of noticing the man in it has vanished. You don't reclaim your power by withdrawing. You reclaim it by reconstituting what you lost. Not the charm that made her laugh. Not the sensitivity that earned her trust. But the structure underneath those things, the self that held its form. Somewhere along the way, you began editing, not dramatically, subtly, strategically. You told yourself it was care, but it was caution. You told yourself it was growth, but it was appeasement. You weren't leading anymore. You were curating, shaping yourself around her feedback instead of your values. You didn't disappear to betray yourself. You disappeared to be kept. And that's the fracture. Not that she left, but that you couldn't hold your shape while she stayed. So you begin again, not as a reaction to her, as a return to your own gravitational pull. You don't need to be louder, you don't need to be harder, you need to be exact. You begin at the first compromise that made you flinch, the first silence you filled to avoid discomfort, the first moment you said yes without alignment. This isn't about fixing yourself to win her back. This is about subtracting everything you added in the hope of being chosen, because anything added for approval becomes leverage against your integrity. This is the difference between control and orientation. Control scans her mood before speaking. Orientation speaks with presence and lets instinct sort the rest. Control tries to avoid rupture. Orientation makes rupture irrelevant. This is what most men never learn. That true safety isn't in how gentle you are. It's in how intact you remain when gentleness isn't rewarded. Schopenhauer didn't reclaim this. He tried to construct philosophy where identity should have been. He asked for love to validate what he hadn't embodied. And when it didn't, he made women wrong for not responding. But she doesn't respond to thought. She responds to structure, to tension, to direction. Not because she's simple, because she's scanning for something ancient, something unshakable beneath your affection. You don't need to harden to offer that. You need to become whole. That's what she couldn't feel. That's what you began faking. And that's what you now rebuild, not to attract her, but to stop orbiting her, so that when she enters your space again, if she does, she isn't choosing a performance. She's meeting a presence that cannot be moved. And if she doesn't enter, you remain. You don't need to harden. You need to become clear. This is the mistake most men make after the fracture. They confuse stillness with indifference, presence with performance, and strength with silence. But you are not here to retreat from the world. You are here to stand in it, unbent, unhidden, unmistakably you. The man who cannot be moved is not immune to love. He simply no longer trades himself for it. He doesn't chase reassurance. He doesn't punish emotion. He doesn't need her to behave a certain way, to feel steady in his skin. Because her behavior is not the ground he stands on. His values are. She can cry, she can drift, she can test, and he will feel it, but he will not fold. Because he has built something inside that no longer requires negotiation. This man does not perform detachment. He simply doesn't need permission to remain who he is. And here's what happens when a woman meets a man like that. Her instinct relaxes, not because he makes her feel safe with promises, but because she can feel his internal structure. It doesn't shake when she pulls back. It doesn't chase when she retreats. It doesn't vanish under pressure. Schopenhauer never became this man, not because he lacked strength, but because he intellectualized what he should have grieved. He refused to be reshaped by pain, so the pain reshaped his worldview instead. He built logic where his presence should have been. You don't need to follow that path. You don't need to explain her. You need to stop explaining yourself. When you become the man who cannot be moved, you don't become untouchable. You become sovereign. You stop orbiting. You stop adjusting. You stop negotiating for worth. And from that place, you don't attract through strategy. You attract through signal. You no longer ask, will she choose me? You ask, is she capable of walking with someone who doesn't disappear? Because you're not trying to be enough anymore. You are already full. And if she doesn't feel that, let her drift. You will remain. But ask yourself this: when she can no longer move you, will you still know how to love her?